Hey guys, Sid from Sid's Trains here, and today we are taking a look at my new right-of-way industry Shay that you saw at the end of my last video. Separately applied handrails. Then there's a separately applied So I've already said this, but this is a right-of-way Shay. It is Western Maryland number 6, and this was one of Right-of-Way's last engines they ever made before they went out of business. And that's kind of why this engine is kind of a long story. So this engine came equipped with a DC can motor, a QSI electronic reverse unit, which is kind of similar to what would be inside of an MTH engine, and then it had a sound system that Right-of-Way made and recorded the sounds from the number 6 Shay in Western Maryland. But the whole thing about this is that it was one of the last trains they ever made. And in Korea, where this train was being made, they were running out of supplies as Ajin, who was the manufacturer of this, was going out of business, and that's what put Right-of-Way out of business. And since Ajin was going out of business, they were running out of materials and supplies. So basically, this engine was put together with everything they had, and that is actually why this engine, while it was said to have sound, it came with no sound. It has the chuff switch, it has the sound switch in it, but it is missing the sound board and the speaker that was supposed to come from Right-of-Way. Another thing that it was supposed to have was a smoke unit, which this one does have the smoke unit in it, except for some reason mine doesn't work, which is something that I'm going to be working on once I figure out how to get it out of the engine. But that is nice that it does at least have the smoke unit. It just probably needs to be redone with a new element. Another thing, so basically the big thing that I've done to this engine is add sound, and that's what we're going to be talking about in this video. So before we actually look at the sound system that I installed in this, I'd actually just like to show you the gearing and the cool way that these Shays run. These are geared steam engines, which means these pistons up here pump up and down this way, turning this rod here that has gears on it, and they turn the wheels. And that's just a very cool system, and Right-of-Way has recreated this very well with the brass construction. And this whole engine is brass. All of the details are brass, the cab is brass, all the shell is brass. The only thing die-cast on this engine is the wheels. So that makes this engine very detailed, and I really like that about this engine. But overall, I just really love this gearing and all the features about it. But now let's go take a look at what I've done to add a sound system to it. So here is the whole setup that I've added to this engine for sound. This here is a Lionel Railsounds 4 setup. This is a small motherboard that was in many small steam engines from the early 2000s and the late 90s. This is a Railsounds 4 Shay board, and it is specific to Western Maryland Shay number 6. So if I were to add command control to this engine, which I probably will not ever do that, but if I do, it does have the specific dialogue to this engine, so that would be nice. And then this is the power supply for this whole setup. This is the power supply for the Railsound system. And I've used these little plastic boxes I had from like an old caboose or something. I think they were on the bottom of it. And I used them to bolster this up so it wouldn't be sitting so down low to the frame, so it wouldn't short out or anything. And then all I had to do was modify some wiring in between the engine and the tender. And the engine and tender are pretty much permanently connected anyway, so that's no big deal. But then there was one thing that I did have to change on this engine that was kind of a bigger deal, was that back here there originally was a uh, constant voltage light board for the backup light here and then the front headlight. That was back here, and that's what this little wire casing, the wires from that board into the engine for the front headlight ran through this. But up here in the engine, next to these cylinders inside the boiler, it is hollow here. So I moved that board to there, and then that gave me space here in the tender for this Railsounds system. Then here's the volume pod. The sound system is kind of quiet, as I don't have a big speaker or anything, so I just leave it at full volume all the time. But this is the volume pod, and I just leave it inside the tender. And I've added some shrink tubing around it so it won't short out or anything. Here is the speaker. That is a Lionel Fatboy speaker inside a Electric Railroad Railsounds Commander baffle that I got from an old upgrade kit that I actually didn't use. I just decided to use a different baffle, so now I'm using this one in this engine, and it perfectly fits inside the cab of this engine. There was a kind of slightly detailed back head on the cab, but it wasn't like extremely detailed, so I decided to put the speaker here as it was the only spot I could put it in. And since this engine is still a conventional engine, if it were to run over a switch or just hit a dirty piece of track, the sounds would turn off and have to restart. So I did add a battery backup inside this engine, which is under the engine in a little plate that's on the bottom, which actually was originally for the right-of-way sound system, and it even has a clip and the wires. So it was really nice to have that, and I could just then modify and rewire it back into this board here. And I will show you that as well as the chuff switch that I added on the bottom, due to the right-of-way chuff switch being part of the ground with the outside rail, which would fry this board, which I did not want to do, of course. So this was actually a very simple install. I had help from a forum member on the OGR forum. Some of you may know him. It's Gunrunner John, or John Will, as some may know him. And that's who helped me with all this, and he has definitely been a help with lots of my electrical upgrades and things, as he created the amazing super chuffer and the chuff generator for the TMCC O-gauge market, which has been a very good upgrade in the hobby, and lots of people use it, and I've used it as well. And I definitely like to thank him for helping me put all this together. But I also will now then just show you the bottom of the engine after I put the cab and the tender shell back on. And one thing I would like to note is that the other die-cast pieces are these weights. They're inside the tender, so it's not just light brass that'll like bend. It does have some kind of beefy metal on the side to make it a little bit heavier. So here's the bottom of the Shay, and as you see, there's this little plate here with 2 screws, and under this is the battery compartment, where I added a MTH rechargeable battery to the little bracket and the wires that are connected to the Railsounds board back here in the tender. And what that does is allow the sounds to not cut out when it goes over a dirty piece of track or a switch where the power will be like interrupted for a second. And that just allows the sounds to keep running. And luckily there was already a bracket here, so I didn't have to make one or just have the battery sit in there. I actually can take this plate off and show you. Another thing I can show you while I'm doing this is under this battery you'll just see some black tape, which is just electrical tape, but that's the bottom of that constant voltage light board that I relocated to the front of the engine here. It may be, yeah, down in here you can see that black tape. That is the bottom of that constant voltage light board. But here's the battery, and here are the wires that run back to the tender. And this is just an MTH rechargeable, as I said before. And it was just handy that this fit perfectly, even with me installing that board inside the locomotive. And as I'm putting the screws back in, you might see some switches down at the bottom there. One of those switches is for the sound system, which I just, instead of it being an on-off switch, I just made it so that it is the Railsounds signal sound switch, so that I can either have chuffing and background sounds with the whistle and bell, or just the bell and whistle. And then the other switch is the smoke unit, which I still have to do some work to. And then this is just a little right-of-way plate that tells you which production number this is, which mine is number 12 of 300. So this is a very early run, and that makes me believe that they just were installing the soundboards whenever they could, because even with this being an early run, mine still didn't have a soundboard. So now let me turn the camera here, and back here is my chuff switch. This is the original right-of-way chuff switch, and it's down here, this little white thing. And that there's a piece of plastic that interrupts the switch from touching the wheel and creating a ground to the sound system, creating that chuff, chuff, chuff sound. And I couldn't use this as the Lionel Railsounds package. You cannot use ground or have a AC 3-rail ground to activate the chuff, as that will fry the board. And then if I slide this down, you might see, it might be hard to see, but when I spin the wheel, there's that little shiny piece down on the wheel, and that is a magnet. And then down here on the truck is a chuff switch from Electric Railroad, the small little black chuff switch. And as this goes around, it activates that chuff switch and gives me the chuff sounds for the engine. And I'm going to install another magnet sooner than later to give me a better sound of chuffing, as Shay's sounded like they were going fast when they really weren't. And my engine, you have to really make it go fast to have that sound, and even then it's going too fast. And one last thing I'd like to note that I modified on this engine is this back coupler. The coupler that came with this engine was hanging down too far, and I couldn't do anything about that, so I just put a Lionel coupler off a old 1995 Hudson I had, and it fit perfectly and just barely sticks out on the back, which actually pulls the cars closer to the engine, which is more realistic in my opinion. And it's just it definitely was something I need to do, and it doesn't rub anymore, so that's good. So now let me turn this back over and talk about a few other things, and then we'll start it up and hear the sounds and finally run it around for a little. So when you start it up, you just hear the background sounds, which is pretty normal for these engines. It's just the basic kind of steam and injector sounds. And another thing I'd like to know is that the backup light and headlight are always on these engines. That's just the way they were designed. And every once in a while you'll get that blowdown you just heard. Here's the whistle. Yeah, that last really high-pitched whistle is the one that I like the most. It just depends on how you blow the whistle and the speed of the engine to determine which whistle will play. That's just kind of how the older rail sounds work compared to the newer Legacy, when you can just pull down on the slider on the Legacy remote and change the pitch. But I really like that whistle, and then here's the bell. So I've pulled up some, actually 2 right-of-way Western Maryland cars that I have that fit really nice with this engine. Then I've kind of just created a small logging train, as Shay's were usually ran on logging railroads. So as you can see, this is a great engine with or without the sounds. I loved this engine when I got it without the sounds, but personally, I just wanted to add sounds as this engine had sounds when it came from the factory or was supposed to have sounds. But I definitely like this engine. I'm happy with the sounds and I'm glad with my upgrade. Before I wrap this up, I would like to mention where I got that sound stuff from. The Railsounds I actually got from Lionel. They still sell some Railsounds boards for specific engines, whether it's Railsounds 4, 5, 5.5, or 6. And they even sell the legacy Railsounds today, but you can't really use those as an upgrade, as they are a lot more complicated to use and set up than the ones that I put in this tender. But overall, I just love this engine. I'm glad that I got the sounds from Lionel, and I'm happy with the way this engine has turned out. And I'm glad that I'm going to be able to use it on my layout as a logging engine once I get some more logging cars and maybe some more Western Maryland cars and rolling stock. I'm definitely glad with it, and I hope you guys have enjoyed watching me run this train and show you what I've done to it. As always, stay tuned for more videos like this one. Comment down below, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications, and tell others about the channel. I'm Sid, and I'll see you next time, guys.